This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel ramps up security on its northern border against Iranian-backed Hezbollah. And see what Syrians crossing the Israeli border for medical help discover. Plus, archaeologists dig deeper into biblical Jerusalem. And Israel mourns the passing of its greatest photographer who chronicled Israel's history. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. U.S. President Trump's plan to increase defense spending by $54 billion comes as his administration faces a number of foreign policy challenges around the globe. And as CBN's correspondent George Thomas explains, that includes the Middle East.
In the Middle East, ISIS continues on its path of death and destruction. The president says defeating the group and keeping Americans safe at home and abroad is a top priority.
The Department of Defense presented its preliminary plan to the White House today to defeat ISIS. This plan has been delivered by Secretary Mattis, and who is currently briefing the principals on the option presented with today and seeking their input and feedback.
Over the weekend, a 1,300-foot giant sinkhole was discovered in the Iraqi desert, believed to be the site where ISIS shot, then dumped up to 4,000 bodies. Most of the victims killed execution style, with their hands bound and their eyes blindfolded. Also, ISIS is reportedly using puppies as suicide bombers. Video has emerged allegedly showing ISIS fighters strapping an explosive belt to this puppy and planning to remotely detonate the device. Fortunately, Iraqi forces were able to rescue the dog and defuse the bomb. Meanwhile, west of Iraq, Iran's influence continues to grow in the region. Almost 2 years after signing a deal to curb its nuclear ambitions, the Ayatollahs, flush with billions of dollars from the agreement, are still testing their missiles and exporting their terror tactics.
For too long, Iran has been funneling weapons and cash to their terrorist minions in places like Lebanon, Syria, and the Gaza Strip. They've gone to great lengths to develop nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, and due to the disastrous end of the nuclear-related sanctions under Iran, they now have even more resources to devote to these efforts.
And there's also the nuclear threat from another rogue regime, North Korea. Experts like James Woosley, former director of the CIA, warn that it's perilous to underestimate the communist country's atomic arsenal. 2 weeks after the North conducted a ballistic missile test, Woosley believes the country's weapons are likely more advanced and dangerous. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis recently warned North Korea that America's commitment to defending her allies in the region is ironclad.
Any attack on the United States or on our allies will be defeated, and any use of nuclear weapons would be met with a response that would be effective and overwhelming.
The U.S. faces potential threats from countries like China and Russia as well. These and other hotspots make for a chaotic, dangerous landscape around the world as Trump begins his presidency. George Thomas, CBN News.
10 years ago, Hezbollah militants crossed the Lebanon border to attack Israeli soldiers. That ambush sparked not only a war, it showed the dangers Israelis face each day from all sides. As Chris Mitchell reports from Israel's northern border, the IDF is preparing for the next and perhaps even bigger border war.
CBN News obtained a rare look at the Israel Defense Forces getting ready for the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah. We rode along the border with 2 IDF combat officers. And if you listen closely, you can hear the sound of protection being created in this rugged terrain. This UN flag behind me represents the international border. On the other side of the fence is Lebanon. I'm standing in Israel, and the Israel Defense Forces have built a barrier, maybe 15 to 20 feet high, to protect against Hezbollah infiltrations.
First of all, it gives us an observation point to see better. On the other hand, it gives us better protection. Today, if a person runs toward the barrier to cross it, he can't run easily. He needs to stop for a moment or two. That gives us enough time to react.
They know their enemy.
We know the other side isn't innocent. We're searching for the points that are unseen, where they can get in. And because of this, we are working on the entire barrier, not on a specific point.
Up here on the border, the enemy is always a clear and present danger. Just about a mile away from here is a Lebanese Shiite village, most likely a Hezbollah stronghold. And one more sign of the Hezbollah presence here on the border, just beyond the fence there, you can see the yellow Hezbollah flag.
Right here, there is an Israeli community called Shetula. We see that the community is close to the security fence. We are the line of defense, so we built a kind of wall that can be close to the community. We know that the intention of Hezbollah is not only to look for military targets. His goal is to harm every Israeli. It doesn't matter if it's a child, or a man, or an elderly person. Their goal is to harm Israelis, whether civilians or military personnel. Because of that, we protect civilians and also military personnel, because the goal of the military is to protect the state.
This is where the last war began. This memorial marks the site of a Hezbollah ambush in 2006. They kidnapped 2 soldiers and killed 3. And this incident marks the beginning of the Second Lebanon War.
Hezbollah picked this spot because it's a dead area with no cell phone reception. They know the area well. They did follow up, and we also broadcast their clip on the news where we see the kidnapping. They collected intelligence on us.
Israeli leaders back in Jerusalem are also aware Hezbollah is thinking about the next war.
Hezbollah is planning in its next war to cross the border, to go on the offensive. We have to be prepared for that as well. They're trying to take a town captive, something like this. We have to be prepared for that.
Hezbollah has posed, as Israel's leading military officials have said, a strategic threat to the country, and that is why Israel has taken preemptive actions against Hezbollah and the Syrians that are transferring weapons to the Hezbollah in neighboring Lebanon. It has created a measure of deterrence for Israel.
Israel's goal is to stop Syrian weapons from getting into Hezbollah hands. Despite these strikes, Lebanese media claim Hezbollah now possesses what they call game-changing weapons.
We're talking about 130,000 rockets in the hands of Hezbollah. They have not been fired during the Syrian civil war. They're saving them all for us. And they're aimed at our cities. They can hit as far south as Eilat. Our entire country is in the range of those 130,000 rockets.
One more reason behind the need for vigilance here.
You look at the area. It's a beautiful area. Nature, nostalgic. Everything looks as innocent as possible. But from our understanding of the enemy, we know that there will be a war here, and that's why we need to prepare to prevent an infiltration further inside.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, on the northern border with the Israel Defense Forces.
Thousands killed and millions more on the run. That's just part of the cost from the ongoing Syrian civil war. Yet, in all the chaos and heartache, unexpected examples of compassion could be healing more than just physical wounds. Here's what I found out when I visited the Western Galilee Medical Center in northern Israel. This is the Golan Heights, part of Israel's 54-mile border with Syria. For decades, it remained fairly quiet. Then 6 years ago, Syria erupted into civil war. Now rebel forces and Syrian troops battle each other less than 2 miles away. In the midst of that fighting, however, we found a phenomenon. More than 3,000 wounded Syrian civilians have mysteriously crossed the border for medical treatment in Israel.
What we get here in my department, ear, nose and throat, so most of them are facial injuries.
Dr. Ayal Sela is an ear, nose and throat specialist.
Most of the injuries are mid-face, lower face, from gunshot wounds, and those who survive, they're being evacuated to us, and we do reconstructive surgery.
Here at the Galilee Medical Center in Nahariya, they've treated more than 1,500 victims of the Syrian civil war in the last 3 years. And though they're enemy countries, at least the Syrians are getting a good impression of the Israeli medical system.
Maybe 3 years ago, they were afraid to be here. Actually, our reputation is walking before us in Syria, and we get also patients that were asked to come to us.
During treatment, they stay in regular units where about half the staff speak Arabic. For extended recuperation, they're moved to this underground ward.
There is no other passageway but to here. We cannot go to a place controlled by the regime to get treatment, so we come to Israel.
This Syrian farmer came to Israel after an explosion severely injured his hands.
No, I am not afraid, because I asked some guys who were here about the treatment. They treated me humanely. They didn't discriminate against us as Syrians or enemies.
This man first received treatment in Jordan and then Israel for bullet wounds. He's worried about possible repercussions from coming to Israel for help.
We grew up as children knowing that Israel's an enemy.
Sela says as doctors and caregivers, they don't see the Syrians as enemies, but as patients.
We treat patients, we treat people, and they come in a severe state. You see it in their eyes. They look at us with their eyes and they look for help. They look for compassion.
And he shares the hope that this medical help might eventually make an impact for peace.
Once we treat them and you see the evolving of trust and they're opening to us, and if we change one Syrian and the second and the third, and they go back to Syria and they will educate their children that they are not so bad.
Sadly, however, it doesn't appear these patients will even see peace within their own country anytime soon. Coming up, the Bible comes alive as archaeologists uncover biblical Jerusalem. Welcome back. When people visit Jerusalem's old city, they may believe it's the same place King David set up as his capital some 3,000 years ago. But that's not exactly the case. And as Chris Mitchell shows us, archaeologists are uncovering the original city and telling an amazing story.
So we're looking at the city of David from here.
This is the city of David. So we have the palace area over there.
Anarina Heyman serves as the outreach coordinator for the city of David.
Welcome to the city of David. It's the home to the ancient biblical Jerusalem. And up till 150 years ago, everybody thought that the ancient biblical Jerusalem lies within the confines of the old city right behind you, within the walls there. So the question is, what happened 150 years ago, and where is the ancient biblical Jerusalem?
She then helped answer that question by explaining how the city of David lay hidden for nearly 2,000 years, until a British archaeologist began a discovery that continues to this day.
Chris, we're standing at a magical place right now. This is the place when Charles Warren came through the fissure that he found. He saw something, and when Charles Warren saw this, he knew that he rediscovered the ancient biblical Jerusalem.
Was this the beginning, sort of the unveiling of the city of David in the modern time?
Exactly, because now we're speaking of a 2,000-year period where nobody knew where the ancient city was. Most people thought when they came that what they saw in the old city, that was ancient biblical Jerusalem. It's only when he found this that he discovered, but wait a minute, the ancient Jerusalem lies outside of what we call today the old city.
The discovery of this tunnel system, known as Warren's Shaft, visually tells how King David captured the city and brings the Bible to life.
When we saw this, we suddenly saw exactly how the picture came together. And many times when we do excavations, we also don't know what we're looking at. And then we have to go to the Bible, and that starts explaining it. So it's the Bible and the excavations and the Bible coming together, giving us the full picture of ancient Jerusalem.
Further down, they found where men became kings.
Most of the kings of Israel was anointed where we're standing right now. We are standing at the place of anointing. And Isaiah says, "You will draw forth water with joy from the springs of salvation."
In fact, the city of David echoes with the people of the Bible.
Abram, when he met Melchizedek. But then we get to David, to Solomon, we get to Isaiah, when he was giving his prophecies on these very walls here. Jeremiah, afterwards, when he had to speak about the destruction that was looming over Jerusalem. All those things happening exactly where we're standing right now.
More than 10 years ago, archaeologists uncovered another biblical site, the Pool of Siloam, that was fed by the nearby Gihon Spring. It's the place where Jesus healed the blind man, and also where the Jewish people would gather for the feasts of the Lord.
3 times a year, all the men had to come to the mikveh in the pool, and from there get ready to go to Temple Mount. And this is the walk, the final ascent that all the pilgrims can do again when they come to Jerusalem.
Heyman sees this final ascent as a merger between archaeology and prophecy.
Something amazing is happening, Chris, because we said that we are now excavating this road. And again, prophecy is being fulfilled, because it says in Isaiah, build up the road. the highway. And it says, remove the stones for my people's return.
One ongoing excavation is this tunnel leading from the Pool of Siloam to the Temple Mount. Haman says it reveals the past and opens a door to the future. One of the City of David's most ambitious projects is this excavation called the Givati, where the entire history of Jerusalem is being revealed as if the rocks are crying out.
You can see exactly how she slowly disappeared from civilization, because one city was built upon the other. And you could see how the city could have lost hope, thinking, who's ever going to discover me again? Until God says, but in a time of favor, nothing can stop it. And that's what we see in Givati. Jerusalem is slowly being revealed.
Haman sees prophecy unfolding.
And we're starting to see in the last decade the blueprint. She's starting to share what she looked like to us again. So you can see how prophecy is speeding up as we go. It says, Hitna arim me'afar kumi, shake off your dust, arise, take your rightful place, Jerusalem. If you see the excavations here on a daily basis, you can see the buckets flying, you can see the dust literally flying about, how she is shaking off her dust.
She considers her role in the City of David a privilege.
I call myself the luckiest person in the world, the luckiest girl in the world, because I have the opportunity to take what we see here and tell the people about the City of David, about the ancient Jerusalem. And every person that is passionate about Jerusalem and serious about biblical prophecy needs to know this.
Up next, Israel mourns the passing of a beloved chronicler of its history. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Israel mourned the passing of world-renowned photographer and friend of CBN News, David Rubinger. Rubinger, who was 92, chronicled Israel's history since before the beginning of the state. Here's a story we did earlier about his life and work.
More than 60 years ago, Israeli photojournalist David Rubinger began his career, just before the birth of the State of Israel.
That gave me a chance that very few photographers have to really cover a story, an entire story from A to Z.
Rubinger tells his story and Israel's in a book called Israel Through My Lens. Documented those early historic days, like the day in 1947 when the UN voted for the establishment of a Jewish state.
People were dancing in the street. The young kids, on the morrow of the UN decision to establish the State of Israel, climbed aboard a British armored car with the British police numbers on it and the British driver, and with a hand-painted flag.
He began as a freelance cameraman and later worked for years as Time Life's photographer. He showed Israel's first years, its fight for independence, and the joy of Jews returning to the Promised Land from all over the world.
The idealism, the feeling, the striving for equality, social justice, ashamed not to work.
During his career, he's photographed nearly all of Israel's leaders, from Jerusalem's legendary mayor Teddy Kollek to its future Prime Minister Shimon Peres, Prime Minister Golda Meir at the Knesset and in her kitchen, Yitzhak Rabin and his wife Leah having breakfast, then Israeli Generals Rabin and Moshe Dayan during wartime. And of course, Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion.
His face was something. I have it on the cover of one of my books. It's like granite, strong like a rock.
He's covered Israel's triumphs, capturing the jubilation after the successful raid on Entebbe. He showed Israel's suffering through its many wars.
One of my dearest pictures is one taken in Aswan in 1980. Very, very intimate pose between two leaders after 4 wars. And such intimacy.
But Rubinger's most famous photograph came during the 1967 Six-Day War. For the first time in nearly 2,500 years, Israeli paratroopers captured Jerusalem's Old City and the famous Western Wall. The paratroopers came to the wall, and Rubinger was there.
In order to get any little bit of perspective, I wanted to shoot from below, and I was lying on the ground and shooting, and these three soldiers just walked by. I got 3 frames nearly identical.
Years later, Rubinger photographed those same 3 paratroopers back at the Western Wall. The men and their country have grown up.
Grown up is the word. Gone is the beauty of childhood, the idealism of youth.
Since 1967, Rubinger feels Israel has made unwise decisions. He's very critical of many of its policies. But as the nation celebrates one more anniversary, he says it's been a remarkable history.
Summing up 62 years, you still cannot avoid realizing one thing. I think it's unprecedented in history that people did in 60 years what this country did in 60 years.
Coming up, NBA star wins an award and plays basketball in Jerusalem. Welcome back. Former NBA star Amare Stoudemire was honored in Jerusalem by the American Jewish community and the State of Israel. The Jewish National Fund and Jewish Community Relations Council of New York presented Stoudemire the Martin Luther King Jr. Award that honors those who promote peaceful coexistence. Off the court, Stoudemire is involved in helping children at risk through art and basketball. Stoudemire retired from the New York Knicks after 14 seasons with the NBA last summer and then joined the Israeli team Hapoel Yerushalayim, which he co-owned.
I wanted to play basketball here in Jerusalem. I always wanted to play here. It's been a quest for me to live abroad for me, my family and I. And the history here is grand. I mean, for anyone who believes in the Bible, it's something that I think the world gravitates to because it's just the hub of biblical studies. So that's what's special about it for me.
Stoudemire and his family currently live in Jerusalem. His team won the Israeli League Championship in 2015. That's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.